Hi everybody, my name is Peter Radford from Beyond This, and this session is about looking at the aims of education and why this is such a significant question, I think, at this point in history, perhaps more than ever before. After Christmas, when the government announced that exams this year were going to be cancelled, I heard a number of different responses from students and teachers and school leaders. They went something like this. One student said, well, what's the point in the rest of the year's lessons then? Another student said, what's the point in all the work and learning I've already done if people aren't going to take my grade seriously now? Both of those responses from students seemingly demonstrating that in their minds, the purpose of their learning was in order to get a grade, that the value of the learning itself was not a factor in their thinking. A teacher said this: how are we going to get students to do any work now? As if the only motivator for students is an exam or the threat of failing an exam or the promise, the carrot or the stick, promise of getting a good grade or the threat of failing. As if there's no other possible motivation they could have for learning. And a head teacher writing to parents said this: students will still need to work hard because the teacher assessed grade will be need to be based on clear evidence. All of this, I came away from hearing these different comments feeling utterly depressed. What have we done? How have we failed so singularly that our students, our teachers, our whole system seems to have bought into, hook, line and sinker, the notion that the only reason children go to school is to get a piece of paper with a grade on it that may therefore enable them to access the next stage of education or to access a particular career. That seems to me utterly depressing. I asked my own kids, therefore, I put them on the spot. What do you actually think school is for? My 16-year-old son, who's in year 11, he said this: he said learning. Typically blunt, short response from a 16-year-old boy. I pushed him a little bit and he said, well, learning for things that you might do in life. So you could see that there's a correlation between what we're learning now and later in life, but I wasn't inspired by his answer, I have to say. My daughter, who's in first year at university, she said to teach you things that will help you progress and get a job. Then I went to my youngest son, who's 14, year 10, and he said this immediately, without hesitating: to keep children occupied whilst their parents work. Maybe he has a really good point there. I pushed him again, but I said, is that all? Is that the only reason you go to school? And then he said this. He thought for a moment, but it was quite close to the tip of his tongue. He said this. He said, to keep society working so that those who don't do well in school will do the jobs that the rich people don't want to do. I find that fascinating. And fascinating that that should have been so close to the forefront of his thinking that he came out with that before any broader recognition or acknowledgement of what school is for. And actually, there's some truth in what he said. Of course there is. And I want to kind of examine that a little bit in terms of how education has played a part in maintaining society and government systems. But then what I want us to get thinking about is, what should school be for? What do we want the schools of the 21st century, of our future, to look like? Because we're arguably in a context at the moment where we're simply perpetuating a status quo that I think is not fit for purpose. So looking backwards, you could arguably suggest that there's been three big reasons for educating children. One, to save the world, and I'm going to look at that in terms of how religion has played a part in the spread of education. Secondly, to maintain the economy, and thirdly, to maintain a system of governance. Arguably, Christianity has been perhaps the single biggest force for expanding universal education over the centuries. Did it do it with a singularly moral aim? I'm not sure. They would certainly have said so. But undoubtedly, it's an explicit part of Catholic missionary strategy was to plant schools in order to educate children in the Catholic faith in order to spread the Catholic religion in that culture or in that locality. Post-Reformation, the Protestant Church took a different approach to planting schools. They were for all people in the parish, not simply to educate in the faith, but Protestantism, remember, grew out of a rejection of the Catholic Christianity, and it came about at the same time that the scriptures were translated into the vernacular, and therefore, and at the same time of that, there was the invention of the printing press and an emphasis on individuals being able to access the Bible for themselves. And in order to access the Bible for themselves, they needed to learn to read and write. So reading and writing as a means to access the Bible, in order, therefore, to grow in the Christian faith, was undoubtedly a significant part of the motivation for growing education across Christendom. So there was a clear relation in that expansion of education whereby a certain kind of knowledge would bring salvation. Then there's education to maintain the economy. Now, Dan Pink analyzes this quite succinctly, quite helpfully in his book, A Whole New Mind. And he suggests that there are three distinct ages to the job market. There was the industrial age. The industrial age was built on manual labor, assembly lines, factories growing up. In order to increase productivity, we need more people. People need to know their place and fit into that big industrial wheel, cogs in that wheel, in lines, easily replaceable, get people to fulfill a role, and importantly, those people need to comply, need to follow orders, need to know what they need to do, and need to do it. And if they don't, we can switch them out, we can replace them with another one. Now, the industrial age gave way as it became more and more automated to the information age. That the currency of jobs in the information age has been knowledge and expertise, and also consumerism, because as those factories grew and were producing more and more, well, essentially they needed people to buy more and more of the stuff that they were producing. So there was a need to teach people to consume, to fit in, to do what everybody else is doing. And so arguably our schools contributed to this way of being, way of building society. Encouraging people not to ask questions, not to stand out, but to fit in, and importantly, to be consumers of knowledge. That functional transfer of knowledge from the teacher to the learner. But of course, the knowledge economy, the information age, has now given way to what Dan Pink calls the conceptual age. We now have computers that can do that thinking for us. They can analyze charts and diagnose patients and even mark essays with more accuracy in greater volume than any human being ever could. So the jobs of the age we're now coming into, already in arguably, are jobs that require those right brain aptitudes to be at the fore, those aptitudes of creativity, of design, of empathy, problem solving, synthesis, innovation, the ability to see the big picture, to imagine new possibilities, to problem solve. And those skills, those aptitudes, arguably our education system is not currently developing in our young people. So we educate the heck out of the left brain, that logic, sequential, the ability to recall, and all of that stuff which was useful for the information age is far less useful. Our students are never going to have to remember 3 hours worth of information ever again. That's not a useful skill to have. We can find out any piece of information at the type of a few keynotes on a keyboard. What they need is the ability to apply that knowledge in order to imagine new possibilities and to problem solve and to create a better world. So there's an issue whereby our education system has not caught up with the rapid pace of the change of technology that is giving rise to an entirely different set of circumstances in terms of where our economy is going. But there's a question here: do we still essentially want people to comply. Our schools are brilliant at getting people to comply. Is that a good thing? Is that a moral thing? Is that indicative of the society we want to build? And what are the problems associated with that? Well, that leads on to the third big aim of education historically, which that it's been used to maintain a system of governance, going back to Socrates in ancient Greece. Socrates was executed by the ancient Greeks because he, quote, was corrupting the youth. What did they mean by corrupting the youth? Well, he was getting the youth to ask questions. He was getting people to think for themselves and to question authority. And when you've got a system of autocratic government, you don't want people challenging that. You don't want people standing up and saying, hey, this isn't fair or this shouldn't be. And so we can't have people who are encouraging people to ask questions and to challenge authority. And so plenty of governments over the centuries have got rid of those irritants that have attempted to stir up people to think for themselves. And yet education surely is about exactly that, getting people to think for themselves, getting people to question. We say that, we pay lip service to that. Most people through their teacher training have done all sorts of stuff on encouraging questioning. And yet our systems are brilliant at squashing any kind of innovation or any kind of difference or any kind of non-compliance. You could look obviously at communist states which explicitly push a certain agenda. Chairman Mao's Little Red Books, and then in the United States, children on a daily basis or a weekly basis pledging allegiance to the flag. What about in the UK? Our classrooms set up with children sitting in rows, listening to somebody in authority, somebody wearing a tie, somebody that they have to call sir, having to walk into the room in single file, sit down in silence, answer their name to a register. What are we teaching here? And coupled with that, are we exacerbating an individualism that we don't want people to disrupt? An individualism which helps our capitalist markets to flourish, that idea of every person succeeding in isolation from everybody else, succeeding and therefore being in competition effectively with everybody else. Far from rewarding people for collaborating on their homework, we punish them for collaborating on their homework. If they hand in something that is remotely similar, they get a detention for it. When in actual fact, in the real world, in the job market, that ability to collaborate and come up with a joint solution is exactly what will feed their success. But that individualism links to our system, which keeps people in competition with each other. This is what our schools look like. We are educating people not to be participants in a democracy. We don't believe in democracy, not really. We're certainly, our schools, we certainly are not preparing our students or even our staff to be active participants in a democratic process. We have a very clear system of hierarchy, a very clear system of following orders in order to ensure that the people on the bottom know their place and fulfill their role. And so our schools arguably are peddling a system that is designed to maintain a system of governance whereby, even though we call ourselves a democracy, we don't want people to buck the system. So what should education be for? What should education be for? Well, I'm going to suggest that we need to take that question seriously. We need to give some time and some thought to it. Claxton and Lucas say their schools are essentially moral enterprises. Their cultures, their practices are saturated with value judgments. Redesigning schooling is not principally a technical matter. It's first and foremost a moral one. Even that question, what should schools be for? That word should implies a morality about it. And we need to think carefully about what we're doing and why we're doing it and what we believe in, because we are conveying values in everything we do. When we're, the language that we use regarding struggle, failure, and success, we're conveying values. The activities that we prescribe, you need to do this, rather than activities that encourage autonomy. What would you like to do? Those are reflections of our values as an education system. The way we lay out our classrooms that perpetuate competition rather than collaboration. We're saying that competition and isolation is a better thing. There's a value placed upon that. Right answers versus good questions. Seth Godin uses this phrase, teaching people to collect dots rather than to connect dots. We're placing values on certain activities and certain aptitudes above others. Sanctioning defiance rather than encouraging it. Defiance is seen as almost the ultimate sin in most school contexts. That's an excludable offence. When in actual fact, do we want people who will simply do as they're told for the rest of their lives? Isn't actually that ability to challenge the status quo, to stand up to injustice, to stand up to a bullying boss, to speak out when they see something that they think should be different, actually, that is probably going to be the kid who is most likely to be successful, rather than simply fitting in. An emphasis on understanding and recall instead of application and creativity, an emphasis on rules and conformity instead of exploration and difference. We're communicating values that I'm not sure we truly believe in. So I'm going to suggest we need to start with the end in mind. I often have done this as an exercise with staff and with students. Imagine, get a blank piece of paper and draw a stick person on it. And ask yourselves, do this as a group activity, what makes an outstanding global citizen? Now, very quickly, I've never had people really disagree about this. People come up with words like this: someone who's helpful, someone who's outward looking, someone who's knowledgeable, who's resilient, someone who's healthy and active. And you can link those different aptitudes to different parts of the body. And so if that's what we're aiming for, if that's what we're trying to produce, well then, are we doing on a daily basis what will lead to that outcome? And you could argue often, actually, no, we're not. Now, that focuses again on the individual. So I want to broaden out that question. Another question activity that I'd encourage you to do with your staff teams is this: to ask yourselves, what kind of world do we want to live in? See, that's a bigger question. That's not just about the individual learner. It's about society. Where are we going? And invite people to imagine their ideal community. What would it look like? What would be there? What wouldn't be there? What would it feel like? And as you begin to imagine the kind of world you want to live in, well, that from there we can work back and put in place the building blocks that might bring that potential to effect in reality. That's inspiring. The potential to build a better world, the potential to fulfill our potential as individuals. That's something to get excited about. That's an education project that I want to be a part of. What are we doing that might actually shape the future? How about we get our students on board with getting excited about imagining a better world and how they can play a part in that. So what should the aims of education be? I encourage you to have a look at the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 29. Have a look at that. It's a brilliant starting point for thinking about what should education be for. I'm not going to read through that right now. I just want to share with you 5 elements that for me represent what are my dream for education, and therefore I've hung them on that word dream, D-R-E-A-M. So the first one is that education, I believe, should be about discovery, not just knowledge. From Plato, beginning his school of Athens, arguably the first Western university, the purpose that he had right from the outset, if you know Plato's analogy of the cave, it's about discovering truth, discovering the universe. Yes, we need to stand on the knowledge, on the shoulders of those who've gone before us, but to go further, not simply to have knowledge, but to discover more. And that's exciting. Number 2, respect and collaboration. Not individual success. So learning how to work together rather than learning how to work apart, and the respect for each other and understanding of each other integral to that. 3rd, equipping for an adventure, not prescription to a career. Recognizing that life has ups and downs, twists and turns, that our job market is going to continue to change. Are we equipping young people with the knowledge, the skills, the aptitudes to be able to ride and roll with the punches, and to be successful in spite of what life may bring them. Number 4, artistic expression, not conformity and compliance. Teaching our young people to find who they are and express who they are, and feel comfortable and confident to express who they are, and to have that sense of self-value in their worth as a unique individual, not simply as another cog in the big wheel. And then lastly, mastery to make an impact, not performance to hit a standard. So the inspiration and the motivation that comes from mastering a skill, and as a result of that, having the confidence and recognition that I have a significant contribution to make, and developing the ability to make that contribution in order to make a difference rather than simply to hit a grade or hit a standard. Ken Robinson calls this finding the element in every young person and developing that element that gives them the spark to succeed. So discovery, respect and collaboration, equipping for an adventure, artistic expression, mastery to make an impact. I'd encourage you, this is not a definitive or an exhaustive end of the conversation, but this is perhaps a starting point to discuss in your own teams with your colleagues, why are we here, what are we doing this for, and then step back, how can we actually change, adapt what we're doing in order to fulfill those aims. Thank you very much.